Welcome back to the morning show. This is Arise News. I'm Biola Alabi.
I'm Tundra Abiola.
And I'm Veronica Odeka.
Job numbers in Nigeria have been on a steady decline, according to some economy watchers, who believe that this is just one of the host of indicators to show the perilous state of the country's economy. Capital flight continues to be a problem. The manufacturing sector is still under a lot of pressure, owing to the unreliability of power supply, among other things. But President Muhammadu Buhari's handlers are confident that the man is on the verge of evolving an enduring panacea for all these concerns, having gone on a rendezvous in the United Kingdom to put together an economic team that would finally deliver on the many prospects of Nigeria's economy. Well, to help us explore this issue, we are now joined by Jideofor Adibe, a professor of political science and international relations at Nasarawa State University, KEFI, and a columnist with the Daily Trust newspapers. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Now, before we delve straight into the economy, seeing as you're in Nasarawa State and a professor, I want to talk about security, since that's really a hot-button topic right now. We've had unfortunate news in recent times of attacks on institutions of education. How secure do you feel in Nasarawa State on the campus? What is the security being provided for you? And also on the broader scheme, how does security impact the economic prospects, especially in the north?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me say that Nasarawa State, especially KEFI, is relatively safe. We have episodic incidents of herdsmen-farmers clashes, but it's not as dramatic as you see in states like Benue State, Plateau, and sometimes Taraba. So in terms of relative security, no part of the country is completely safe. In relative terms, you can say that KEFI is safe. Talking about security in general, I think one of the anchors of Buhari's government is to provide security to Nigerians. Buhari came at the time the Boko Haram insurrection was, posing a lot of challenges, and the terrorist group had control of a number of territories in the northeast. We must give credit to the government that it was able to contain the Boko Haram insurrection in the northeast. But then, what probably the regime did not take into consideration is that the Boko Haram has this capacity of constantly reinventing itself. So, as opposed to before, when it was using suicide bombs and soft targets, to spread terror, it now became more daring, confronting military installations and carrying the battle, to what you can now call hard targets. But all in all, we can say in relative terms, the security in Northeast, in terms of containing Boko Haram, you can say we can give a pass mark to the government. On the other hand, while the Northeast is a relatively a pass mark for the government, the security situation in the other two zones in the north has deteriorated dramatically. In the Northwest, which hitherto was a bastion of peace and tranquility, you have incidents of banditry, cattle rustling, and kidnapping, armed robbery, and the rest. In fact, at a point, the governor of Zamfara State said he was willing to welcome the declaration of state of emergency in his state. In the same way, Katsina, which is the president's home state, the governor also declared that even he, as the governor, was not safe in his state. And look at Sokoto, and from northwest, you come down to north central. Yes, what we call transhumant pastoralism or farmers' herders conflict predated the government. But then it seems to have escalated with the number of people who are either displaced or killed rising dramatically. So overall, under the president's watch, the security situation in the north has deteriorated dramatically. When he came to power, only one region, the northeast, was seriously in contention. Today, the entire northeast, the entire northwest and north central are not safe. But let me say that it's not entirely a northern problem. It is a Nigerian problem. At the end of the Civil War in 1970, armed robbery was very, very high in the southeast. And many people thought it was an Igbo problem. You know, they had just come out from the war, and some people were saying, yes, it served them right. But then very quickly, it spread to other parts of the country. And the same thing happened with kidnapping. When it started, it was essentially a South-South thing. They were at that time not even kidnapping for ransom. They were, you know, kidnapping to make a point, and only foreigners were being kidnapped. So at that time, we said it was a South-South problem. But then very quickly, it spread to the southeast, and from southeast to other parts of the country. And there is always this contagion effect in whatever happens in one part of the country, the tendency to spread to others. So I think it is better for us to start framing the security situation in the north rather than as a northern problem, but as a Nigerian problem. There are other ways it is a Nigerian problem. The government is making a big deal about its agricultural policy, and the north remains the food basket of the country. And if the security situation in this zone continues to deteriorate, it is going to impact on food supply, and therefore becomes a national problem. And it's the number of people that are going to school there will also decline more. So essentially, security is very important and a Nigerian problem.
Indeed, which is why it was the first question that I asked. I actually see it as an emergency. And I was thinking of the comments of former governor of Sokoto State, Bafarawa, who said that the nation's economy is nearing collapse because of the state of insecurity in the north. It affects us all. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee, essentially. So what do you think the government is missing? What tricks are they missing at this point? We have the military announcing the third phase of Operation Scorpion Sting, if it's translated to English. But phase 1 and 2 have not done the magic. What needs to be done now to secure the north so that the whole country can have peace?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think somebody made a joke and say if you want to have job security, you work under Buhari. It is obvious that both Boko Haram, they reinvented themselves. They are not exactly as degraded as the government claims. And the security situation continues to deteriorate. And the people at the helm, of those security architecture continue to retain their job. I don't think... just look at what happened, in other countries, they will have tendered their resignations. And a president that is, has a different mindset will have fired them. That is what leadership is all about. So we expect actions in that direction, and dissipating energy in a fight against corruption that is not properly defined, and a fight where the enemies are not clearly delineated. I don't think it should be as urgent as the one about security situation. The people carrying out the fight are not winning. They have not convinced the Nigerians that the spate of kidnapping around the country is abating, and they are sitting pretty in their jobs. And it is at that front that the government, the president himself, needs to know that the buck stops on his table and do something. When you see 1 or 2 people fired and benchmarks, deliverables are given to people who come to serve in your cabinet, other people will sit up.
Thank you, Professor. I want to pick up on that point, which is about job security and the people that work for President Buhari. In a piece that you wrote on April 4th, you had said that there were some low-hanging fruits that this administration, that Buhari needs to take advantage of, because I really want us to talk about Buhari, it's his administration, but it's about Buhari, that Buhari needs to take advantage of. One of those points, and the first one you talked about, was the appointment of his ministers, around looking at people that are more technocrats and people that are untainted. Obviously, the last time he did this and went through this exercise, it was very disappointing to people because it took so long. how can he, I mean, what are the things that he needs to do to, first of all, change that and also get the right people in place? Because like you said, one of the things that people haven't felt confident about is that the right people are in the right position, doing the right things to make this country move ahead.
We are actually all looking eagerly forward to 29th May to see if we can get an indication of what will be the nature and the character of his second term in office. And I say second term with due respect to the challenge of the outcome. But let me say this. The primary thing is for us to see if the president is willing to change his mindset, if he's willing to come out of the comfort zone. He seems historically to be comfortable with people who think like him. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. A leader should be able to assemble people of different make, the ideological orientations, not just people who can say yes to you all the time. And he also has this kind of protectionist ideology, state-driven form of ideology. So you can see he doesn't like anything like privatization. He wants to go back to the era of state ownership of gigantic projects like trying to resuscitate the moribund Nigeria Airways. That's the first thing we want to see, is the president now moving out of his comfort zone. If we can see that he's now been able to assemble certain people, even some of his critics, is he willing to concede some positions to even the opposition, rather than a kind of winner-takes-all mentality? As we saw in the gaffe he committed when he said 97% and 5%. Once he does that, he will start the government. He will start his second term on a very resounding note. Is he willing? People are also going to see, is he retaining Godwin Emefiele when his tenure expires in June? Because what people are looking at, that's not just the individuals, but their own tendencies, their own ideological tendencies. And contrary to what people expect will drive the economy. There is no point if you keep doing the same thing that you've always done, you will always keep getting the same outcome. So we need to come out of our comfort zone. We need to, think out of the box. We need to do something dramatic. That's my own take on that. And that will only become clear to us. On the inauguration date, some of us will be looking forward. We will hope that on the day of the inauguration, he names key nominees, especially those that do not require the authorization of the National Assembly. It doesn't have to take 6 months as he did the time. Name people that will inspire confidence, not people that are very cantankerous. There are already those who are in very triumphalist mood, like the chairman of the ANC, APC, or Shomolo, saying, we are not going to share positions in the National Assembly with anyone. That, for me, is triumphalism, winner takes all, which helps to underline the anarchic character of our politics. It will actually be a big gesture on the part of the president, in my own opinion, if, say, some of the 4 key positions in the National Assembly, the Speaker, the President of Senate, Speaker of the House of Reps, and their deputies, concede one to the opposition. If you say you want to run an inclusive government, that's one way to do it. I don't even know the power these positions command. But in our kind of society where optics is everything, making sure that these things go round is one way of managing the optics. And let me also say that I don't think part of the winner-takes-all mentality, for example, is the Southwest saying you produce the speaker. I think, with due respect, the president is from the Northwest, the vice president is from the Southwest. The 2 zones should recuse themselves from contestations of these positions. Yes, there are people who have done a lot to help the president. There are several other ways you can, help them. There are several other ways you can express your appreciation. But once you want to insist that you want to be number 2 and number 4, then that's also that winner takes all mentality. And that's not going to win you mileage. You are going to be the president of both people who voted for you and president of those who didn't. You are going to be the president of opposition and president of people who are your ardent critics. And that is the way to go, in my own opinion. Not very triumphalist, winner-takes-all mentality. It's not going to take us anywhere.
Thank you, Professor. I just want to follow up, because in the same article, you talk a lot about optics. You touched on optics. Tunde has asked you about security. When it comes to optics and perception and communication, one of the things that critics have said to Buhari in his first term, and I'm not sure, I think it's beyond critics, we all noticed in the first term, there's quite a bit of lacking around empathy for people speaking out against issues, especially around the security situation in the north. We have not had consistent voice from the president around that issue. They're always through spokespersons. There hasn't been an expression of condolences to people that have lost their lives. There hasn't been an action that we've seen. What is it about this president? And when you say he's comfortable with people around him, what is it about this president he has to work on when it comes to optics, perception, and also the idea of unifying the country that he must come out with? And in what time frame must he do this to start to get a change of tide when it comes to this when it comes to a second administration?
Yeah, for me, let me start with a time frame. That time frame should be on the day of his inauguration. That will set the tone. If you remember, his initial appointments, which, were one-sided, they set the tone of the perception of the government. So that even when subsequently things were corrected, for example, I understand that the highest number of DGs are from Ogun State. Nobody was interested in it. As far as people were concerned, especially from the southern part of the country, is that it's clannish. And you need to change that narrative. Sometimes the impression one gets is that he's not even interested in that perception. And we must all be interested, because there is something called legitimacy crisis. If you have legitimacy crisis from one section of the country and it spreads, as it seems to be doing now in some parts of the north, with the rise in insecurity in northwest and north central, is that there might come a time where people will start having a voters' remorse, buyer's remorse. And when such happens, our fear is that when a regime starts to experience that sense of crisis, legitimacy crisis, the tendency is for it to become more repressive. And that is not something we want to do. And we don't want to see the government go into that direction. So that's why, public intellectuals and others are continue to be robustly critical of the regime, not because they hate Buhari or anything, because this is our country. And by offering the kind of criticism, the jobbers around him, those who work for him, who cannot afford to tell him, no, this is not the way things are, then hopefully we are also contributing to the entire marketplace of ideas that he needs to move the country forward. So I think if we start from that one, let him take the first step on the day of inauguration, do something dramatic. Let us see the nominees. Let us see make key policy pronouncements that will drive the country forward. People are just tired about this. We are fighting corruption. If you look at the assessment, the major agencies, they don't seem to buy this narrative that you are winning the war. And by the way, corruption is a symptom of a more fundamental malady. It's not something you win overnight. And you can't even fight corruption effectively if you don't have a nation. So the fundamental challenge is to invest on those infrastructures and strategies that will help to unify people. After every election, elections are like wars without weapons. Though in our own formation, in our own society, sometimes we have weapons. The first challenge of any leader is to start to unify. And that's what we want to see, not just in rhetoric. At one point, he said, I'm going to run an inclusive government. In the next way, he said, we are going to continue to do what we have been doing. So we want to know what he means by inclusive government. It's not just about bringing younger people. It is also a little change in your ideological orientation. It is conceding the different ideas, developmental ideas that are contesting. For example, the idea of restructuring. The president does not lose anything by saying, I am going to set up a committee to look at the various recommendations on restructuring. It will win you friends. you know, there's no point I will continue to play like a tough guy. I don't want to listen to this. I don't think it will work that. For as long as you continue to say, I don't want to listen to that, people also continue to, you know, remain entrenched in their position and remain critical of your own position. But willingness to dialogue, willingness to say, look, I'm interested in this conversation, even if I disagree with your point, but let's have a conversation. And that's what we expect of the president.
Okay, Mr. Adibe, you've made a lot of really good points. I mean, you said he needs to think differently as a president. As a leader, you're not only leading people that you agree with, but also people that you don't agree with. You mentioned that there needs to be policy pronouncements, and other countries that we've seen in recent times going through recessions and growing through that with acceleration policies and plans are Chile. We've had Costa Rica do it recently. You mentioned that economic committees need to be set up. Who are some of the people that need to be on this committee? Who are some of the experts that the president needs to have on this committee to move our country forward?
Well, I wouldn't give the president names. There are Nigerians, talented Nigerians in and outside the country. But what we are saying is let's put square pegs in square holes. Let us think differently. And it depends also on who the president wants to seek advice from. If you hobnob with people who are extremely polarizing, if people who decide on who plays what role are the same people that decided on who played which role in your first term, then we are not likely to get any difference because it's a theological and a philosophical matter. But if you're willing to broaden the base of your advisors and you're willing to come out of your comfort zone, then there are abundance of talents in every part of this country. So it doesn't really matter where you get them. Get very qualified people and be sensitive to your environment. Because you may get the very best people to work with you. If you are not sensitive to the environment, it will be interpreted differently. That's what we talk about, optics. That's the way people perceive you also determines the way they relate to you. I'll give you 2 examples. If America, for example, if Canada starts to stockpile arms, America will not feel threatened because America perceives Canada as its brother. If Britain starts to stockpile arms, America is unlikely to feel threatened. If Iran or North Korea ups its stake, starts to stockpile arms, America feels threatened. So that's perception. So, and I think the president this time around should deliberately be more sensitive to the environment because sometimes he comes out with very good policies. But when those policies interact with our environment, what you call the Nigerian factor, what was meant to be a solution to a problem becomes part of the problem. And that's what we want to avoid.
I want to move to the second tier of government, the states, because we always think of the economy in terms of the federal government. But data from 2018 shows that only 12 states recorded revenues of more than 20% of their recurrent expenditure. That's a measly 20% in measly 12 states. What should governors and governors-elect be looking at this time?
I didn't get some parts of your question, but let me just say that I agree with you that the focus has always been on the government. But I think the quality of governance at the state level is actually much poorer, far poorer than we get at the federal level. Everyone seems to be just focusing on, even our democracy, the nature of our democracy seems to be effective or relatively effective only at the federal level. When you move down to the state and local government levels, the governors are like emperors. The state houses of assemblies are rubber stamps. So who are you to challenge the governor? But having said this, it is one thing to emphasize on internally generated revenue. It is another thing to talk about the capacity of the subunits to generate revenues. There are states, you know, people always talk about Lagos, but don't forget that Lagos has the ports, it has all the companies, location is one our capital for a very long, it was our capital for a very long time. So it is advantageously positioned. There are states that do not have such, And that is part of the restructuring argument. It's not just about geographic restructuring, it's also about fiscal restructuring. There are states that if you allow them to go on internally generated revenue, even the small businesses around will go moribund. So there are fundamental issues of our economy. And that's because even our own constitution is distribution-oriented and not production-oriented. Very few states have the capacity. There are some that have the capacity to raise a little more than they do currently, but I don't think there are many. So the issue of raising money, yes, I agree. There are a lot of squandermania at the state level, probably more than we have at the federal level. The issue of security votes needs to be looked at. But even with all this, what is the capacity of many states, say Zamfara, say Ebonyi, so many of them, what will be their capacity for, where do they raise the revenue from, internally generated revenue? There is just so much you can tax people. And that is one of the reasons why, you know, some proponents of restructuring is because once people talk about restructuring, people are looking at it is geographic restructuring. Why is Kano State having so number of local government and Lagos is having this? Why is the Southeast having this number of states and the other one having? Yes, they are important, but they are not just some of, they are just tips of the iceberg in the restructuring debate. Even though, let me also put it that I do not believe that many of the people, proponents of restructuring, are sincere. I think it's just it's just like card in their game for power and lucre with their northern political class.
Professor, thank you for that. I want to start pick up on the restructuring that you touched on, and then I have another question for you. My first question around restructuring is actually looking at the size of government. That has been one of the conversations that also came up, is the fact that right now our government is too big, too costly. What do you say when it comes to restructuring? And do you think this president will look at that, or do you think that this is one of those issues that he's just not going to touch in his second term?
Well, I read somewhere that he said he now will support community policing. I think it's a component, because let me say that restructuring, there are different things. If you get people, 10 people talking about restructuring, they probably mean 10 different things. But there are arguments within, you know, the restructuring movement, if I may use the terminology, that the president needs to look at. But hitherto, his position was not even to think about it. And I think that was wrong, because it's one of the ideas that are development ideas. It may be nonsensical to him, but you will be willing to dialogue even with people you disagree with. As I said, you can, if you don't believe in other committees, in the Obasanjo one, in Jonathan one, and what other, even the APC committee that on restructuring, if you don't agree, you set up your own committee to harmonize. And sometimes even these committees are set up not because people want to solve problems, but because they want to buy time. And also because to get a sense of trying to get the contending political groups to keep talking and give you space to govern. So he is not willing. He wasn't even willing to listen. And that's not good, in my own opinion. You know, he loses nothing. He will gain goodwill by just saying, let us even look at this idea. I can tell you the discussion, if so, will take no less than 6 months, and that will give him time to concentrate on other things. Well, he doesn't want to do that. And I think he needs to.
All right, Professor, my second question is also on what do you think needs to happen when it comes to setting up or querying or doing an inquiry into our last election? I think we all know that this last election fell short of what we all would like when it comes to defining our democracy. If the president decides to take this on, number one, when and how should he go about it, and when should he make this announcement? Because this isn't the first time a president will do an inquiry. I just want to get your thoughts on what you think the president should do and what this will do to his administration if he goes down this road.
Yeah, I am one of those who believe that he should do that. In my article that you referred to, I explicitly mentioned that he should do that. Yar'Adua did that. We spent about $245 billion on INEC. And we need to know, are we getting value for money? And my own personal opinion is that the election fell short. I'm not even talking about 2015, which it wasn't perfect. What made it seem to look okay was because Jonathan conceded. But apart from Maurice Iwu's 2011, which was like an open-day robbery.
Professor Adibe, talking about what Buhari has to do going into his second term. Professor, we're coming back to you now, and I want you to finish your thoughts on setting up this inquiry, which you did talk about in your article. I would like to expand on it, which is basically saying if we want to move our democracy forward, what do we need to do in taking a reflective look at this election that brought all of us
I think
power?
Yeah, without prejudice to the challenge of the outcome of the election by the PDP and its presidential candidate, I would like to believe that it's not a sign of weakness if the president admits, or on that inauguration day, mentions that the process could be better, and that he was going to set up an independent inquiry of the conduct of the elections, lives were lost, the money that was spent, how judiciously was the money spent, and other things about the election. That will help us to, engender confidence in the electoral process, a belief that the president is not satisfied and that he's setting up an inquiry and wants to make things better next time around, will be some of the justifications the populace will need to come out next time around to vote. Because increasingly people are asking the question now, do votes matter? And people are beginning to make a distinction between what they call organic votes, that's the votes that were cast, and the other votes. That was the one that was either manufactured or concocted. We need to get out of this mindset, and the president, as the number one, the father of all, should set the tone by just saying he will set up an inquiry and he will do something he can, whatever he can, to help sanitize the process. Those who are found to have sabotaged the process, both on his side, because my own personal opinion was that both the PDP and the APC were guilty. Those who are found to have, sabotaged the process through rigging or other malfeasances should be punished. So, but he has to set the tone. Instead of telling us, as the chairman of the APC has, been dancing around saying that it was the best election, the most credible election since Adam was, was in the Garden of Eden. Instead of that kind of mindset, which will be very annoying to people, then we need a sort of humility to show that, no, yes, we are here today, the process could be made better, and we are willing to do whatever we can do to help make the process better.
Thank you. Professor, one of the things I noticed when I was looking at your background is you do quite a bit of stuff around international, in the international community. I wanted to get your opinion on the international community's outpouring and sort of their raised rhetoric around the challenges of Nigeria's economy. The last 2 months has been one international organization after the other talking and projecting around our economy, which is really, IMF talked about fuel subsidy removal. The World Bank came out with a report. There have just been repeated reports around Nigeria's economy. How does the president come out in his inauguration speech or in his first 100 days or first 6 months to let the world know that he has heard them when it comes to our economy, when it comes to youth unemployment, and that he is going to be doing something? What are the themes and what is the tone and what is the tone that he has to strike when it comes to his inauguration speech?
Thank you very much. Well, the international, there are two ways to it. The international bodies, the IMF, the international community, they have their own agenda. That's very clear. And whether they have agenda or not, the investors also listen to them. Mm-hmm. So that's one, we have to be sensitive to that. On the other hand, we do not necessarily need to do things because they were said by the IMF. In fact, one of the former chairman of the Federal Reserve in the U.S. said that the key of his success was to do exactly the opposite of the advice he received from the IMF and the World Bank. So we cannot be talking about desubsidization, for example. They want us to remove fuel subsidy completely. When if you look at the European Common Agricultural Policy, it is enjoying subsidy of about 60%. I agree. So on the other hand, we cannot just take the philosophical position that because they subsidize, we must also subsidize at that level. We have to look at our environment. What is our capacity to do this? The issue is that the issue of subsidy, Nigerians don't even know whether it exists. It was Buhari himself who said, when as an opposition, that subsidy was a fraud. And now we are subsidizing fuel products more than the Jonathan government. So we need a good conversation, come out clean, and to what extent can the, can the state subsidize? I believe a certain level of subsidies is necessary. I believe the certain level of subsidy in, say, fertilizer is necessary because the Europeans, Common Agriculture Policy, they do all those subsidies. In fact, food is heavily subsidized in Europe. And if we remove all the subsidy, then we have to have the capacity to put in place a welfare program so that no one is left behind. For now, we do not have much capacity for such welfare programs. So we need a level of subsidy. And even if you are going to remove subsidy, it has to be gradual because we don't necessarily have a thriving private sector to absorb so many people. So we need to strike a balance between doing what, meeting their own perception. For example, they have always advocated for floating exchange rate for the Naira. Let the Naira find its realistic value. The Buhari government has been to, go for stability. So it uses a foreign reserve to defend the value of the Naira, the value of the Naira, which in many ways makes sense. Yes, it will deplete your foreign reserve, but then even the private sector you have are dependent on foreign inputs. So if you make it very, very unpredictable, then they will not be able even to predict their own cost of manufacturing. It's just to find a balance. The question is, if you continue to defend the value of the Naira in the face of dwindling oil revenue, what is your capacity to sustain it, especially if your foreign reserve is just being drained? This is a conversation experts, Nigerian experts, will have to carry out, and so many things will be taken into consideration. Economic policies do not exist in a vacuum. They exist in an environment. They exist in a political and cultural environment. And only Nigerians who will be more sensitive will be able to factor in how the different environments, political, cultural environments, can impinge on economic policies. What works successfully in the Western world may not necessarily work well in our own environment because policies necessarily have to interact with their environments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure having you on the show. We thank you for your time.